He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Kia ora, nau mai haramai ki te au hurihanga. Hello and welcome to Our Changing World. Ko Kraken Canon tēnei. This week, we've got an episode of the ABC Science and Radio Australia series, Pacific Scientific. The show tells stories about interesting science happening across the different island nations of the Pacific, from the researchers themselves. In this episode, local reporter Adele Fruin learns how scientists in Samoa are working to uncover the secrets of traditional healing plants. She begins by speaking to an environment research scientist near the Samoan capital of Apia.
Hi everyone, my name is Annie Tuisunga. I work here at the Scientific Research Organization of Samoa, or SROS.
Annie grew up in Salofata, a coastal village on the island of Upolu with sandy beaches and coral reefs, home to a diverse marine ecosystem. But it took leaving Salofata to study in New Zealand for Annie to fully appreciate the richness of the flora and fauna that she'd been raised around.
You know, when you grow up in something, it's the norm, so you don't think it's as awesome as it is. You're just used to growing up in a green environment, growing up surrounded by flora and fauna. So I don't think it was something that I really acknowledged or thought it was so great until probably when I left and then came back. You realize how blessed we are to be surrounded by so much native flora and fauna that we shouldn't take it for granted.
After 13 years looking after the environment, Annie is well aware of the value of Samoa's flora and fauna. Since 2019, she has been overseeing the SROS team, looking for plants that could treat diseases that are on the rise in the Pacific.
We just decided to do a massive screening of as many plants as we can because we don't know yet. We don't know if it has bioactive compounds.
With hundreds of plants to put under the microscope in search of health-giving properties, SROS had to find a place to start. Luckily, Samoa is not only rich in plant life, it also has a huge wealth of traditional knowledge.
So a lot of the plants that we started with are actually medicinal plants that are used by traditional healers.
The practice of healing in Samoa goes back thousands of years. The healers that provide herbal remedies are called taulasea. Each village might have several taulasea, each specializing in a different illness.
I know traditional healers, some have been my neighbors and so forth. Definitely they have a place in our communities and in Samoa.
The taulasea keep their healing methods closely guarded in keeping with their ancient role. But scientists do know many of the plants the healers use, and there is some consistency. SROS wants to prove whether these plants really do have the healing properties that taulasea say they do.
We don't want to go against our traditional knowledge, but it's actually enhancing it or proving why it's been effective for so long.
This isn't a new approach. Penicillin was discovered from mold growing on a petri dish and is now one of the most commonly used antibiotics. The poppy has given us more than one type of powerful painkiller, and the bark of the malala tree native to Samoa has huge potential. Samoan healers have been using the bark of the malala tree to treat illness well before American researchers showed any interest in the plant. The compound the malala tree contains, prostratin, shows promise for cancer treatment, Alzheimer's treatment, and the potential eradication of HIV from cells. While it hasn't been turned into a product yet, it's unclear whether Samoa will benefit financially if it is. This is why Annie is leading a team of local scientists, working closely and quietly to make sure financial benefits do come back to Samoa. Her team has been collecting plants throughout the country, on both the island of Upolu and Savaii.
There's the Matavanu crater in Savaii that's supposed to be really rich in plants because it has been largely untouched since the eruption. So that was a really good one that we go back often.
Mount Matavanu is a volcano that hasn't erupted since the 1910s, and the crater is now full of lush green vegetation. Even though it's still considered an active volcano, it's one of the easier places for Annie and her team to visit. Visiting a village, for example, comes with many protocols, including seeking permission from a village mayor and potentially taking part in village-wide discussions and even a feast.
Like, it's really lovely. We love it, but we don't want families to go to so much trouble.
For now, they've stuck with active volcanoes, national parks, and their own villages. There aren't any volcano trips on the horizon, so Annie takes us on a tour of the grounds.
Oh, it's a lot. Just kidding.
To visit some of the researchers doing the work that comes after collection. Schross is made up of several bright teal buildings, and it's raining lightly as we walk between the labs.
So you can see that we're really a sprawling lab, that we have a lot of labs across, so we don't have one large building. A bit hard on days like this when it's raining and they're not really connected.
But it's worth it to catch a glimpse of the nearby Mount Vaya. The clouds don't even clear the summit. It's an amazing view.
Yeah, it is. And I love that it's far away from town as well, so it's kind of quiet. Like, we're not in town.
On the edge of the grounds is a thriving green garden with stone steps leading to its entrance, which is cast in shadow from the thick foliage. But we're walking away from the garden for now to meet some of the people who planted it and are now stuck inside trying to unlock its secrets. There are actually 3 teams of plant investigators at Schross, each searching for useful compounds to tackle a different illness: diabetes, cancer, and antimicrobial resistance.
So this is actually the environment lab, but it's also the lab that we do the anti-diabetes part of the bioprospecting work. So I'll just take you through some of the...
First stop is the anti-diabetes lab.
It's not a secret that diabetes is really quite prevalent in Samoa now.
According to the World Health Organization, about 1 in 5 adults here are living with type 2 diabetes.
That was definitely a big concern for us.
In type 2 diabetes, too much sugar is circulating in the blood. People with the condition must monitor their blood sugar levels, adjust their diet, and take medication for the rest of their lives. Anything that could make managing this disease easier would help millions of people. The anti-diabetes lab is stocked with test tubes and shelf upon shelf of bottles filled with different solutions.
So unfortunately, we've already extracted all of our plants. We don't have any of the actual physical plants here, but we have them in extract form.
The team wants to find compounds that are more effective than the drugs currently on the market. Doing this is tedious work. They start off with branches, leaves, maybe even bark, and condense them down into an extract. Which plant the materials belong to is confidential. So when Annie shows me a tray of test tubes, I have no idea what I'm actually looking at.
So we extract them in the same volume of alcohol, but because of different levels of chlorophyll and so forth, like how they look as an extract form really ranges. So some are really light brown and some are more dark green to black. And then red, this is an interesting color.
Once they've got these many colored plant extracts, they can start the actual screening process.
So I'll also introduce while we're here, Mace. Mace, come here.
Annie calls over a reluctant researcher who has been trying to back away into the corner to avoid the microphone. Before we interrupted him, Mace had been hard at work unleashing plant extracts on an enzyme responsible for high blood sugar.
As you can see here, when it's yellow, that means the reaction is happening. The enzyme is thriving, which means we don't want that, which means you are having high blood sugar, but we want the colorless one. So when it's colorless, which means the plant is stopping or limited the growth of the enzyme.
Once Mace finds a plant extract that is acting on the enzyme and turning the liquid clear, he will eventually move on to yet another step, purification, to isolate the exact compound responsible.
That's a whole other process. So
purification is achieved through many rounds of chromatography, which is the process of separating the many, many compounds in a plant extract.
The purification is very slow, yeah. I myself get really impatient. It's just because, for example, a plant can have hundreds of compounds in it.
It's not enough to know whether a plant extract is effective. The researchers need to isolate the exact compound responsible in order to figure out whether it's something new or something that's already been discovered.
So we know that it works, but we don't know what's in it that works. So it's that part, the purification, trying to find the bioactive compound in that plant. Then once you have that bioactive compound, you'll know whether it's a new discovery or not. So that's the exciting part, but it's definitely time consuming.
One of the reasons this process takes so long is because the researchers don't have all the equipment they need. They have to fly all the way to New Zealand to complete the purification process.
And doing the latter phases, using their equipment, they cost millions of dollars that we don't have in Samoa, yeah.
We leave the anti-diabetes team and make our way to another teal building.
We'll stop by the antimicrobial team first.
There are more people at work here, and there's more equipment. Microscopes and beakers, and burettes used for titrations. The people on this team are trying to find compounds capable of fighting bacteria that have become resistant to the drugs we currently have.
Hi.
I'm good.
Full transparency, one of the scientists on this team is my cousin Ben.
That's my cousin.
He spends most of his time looking for plant extracts that can fight off something called MRSA.
So these are strains of bacteria we get from the hospital that are problematic to causing diseases. So we have it here tested against the extracts.
We know that our drugs are less effective against pathogens than they used to be. Samoa is in a vulnerable position, with high infection rates and a limited healthcare system, making new drug discoveries even more urgent.
That's the importance of our research, is it benefits the community and Samoan people, and then also in the Pacific.
This is exactly what Annie is hoping for. Novel compound discovered by Schross for the benefit of Samoans. But keeping discoveries within the country requires a surprising level of secrecy.
So we're not supposed to name any of the plants that we're working on. So even our CEO and our minister don't know, only the research team knows the names. So everything is coded when we give reports, everything is coded if one of our scientists have to go to New Zealand, for example. And so even the New Zealand team wouldn't know.
This is meant to protect the discoveries of Samoan scientists from overseas scientists dropping into the Pacific nation, taking traditional knowledge and claiming it for themselves.
So a bad thing about that is that the benefits really don't come back to Samoa or the communities where they access those.
Keeping the names of the plants quiet until they apply for patents means Samoa will benefit financially from any products that come from their discoveries.
So I think it's also a chance of Samoa to lead their own bioprospecting work or the biomedicinal work. That way the benefits always comes back to the communities and Samoa.
There is one plant she can tell us about, the guava, which has many medicinal uses, including against diabetes. The only reason we can talk about them, though, is because researchers in other countries have already published their findings.
We discovered it not long after them. It was also good to see that the research that we're doing is hand in hand, showing similar results to what's been done elsewhere.
This secrecy around medicinal plants is something of a tradition. Most traditional healers are wary of sharing their methods, and some refuse to tell scientists which plants they use in a particular concoction. Annie says they try to approach the taulacea with clear intentions. They don't want to erode traditional practices, but instead use traditional knowledge to help more people. The knowledge of the taulacea isn't just medicinal either. They have a deep connection to the environment around them, and they notice when it changes.
The few times that we were really fortunate to talk with traditional healers, they did mention things like some of the medicinal plants that they use for the illnesses that they treat on an ongoing basis is getting harder and harder to find.
This is unfortunately a familiar scene to Annie, having grown up in a coastal village when rising sea levels have been threatening homes and biodiversity. This difficulty in finding plants is part of the reason Schross has set up a medicinal garden, a lush enclave filled with secretive plants, a plot set aside to preserve Samoa's unique biodiversity. So these plants aren't lost, before scientists like Annie even get a chance to understand them. A protected place that she'll let me into a little later. But first, as we've been talking, there's a name that comes up again and again. Sekotilani Aloy, a chemist at the National University of Samoa who is also working on groundbreaking plant research. So we leave Annie at Schross and head off to the bustling university campus.
Okay, my name is Sekotilani Aloy. I'm a chemistry lecturer here at the National University of Samoa. We're currently on campus, so yeah.
Sekotilani is smiling and quick to laugh. She got into research because she liked the challenge.
I ended up doing science because someone said it was a very hard track to do to take, so I ended up doing that.
Sekotilani got her undergraduate degree in Hawaii and then returned to the university in Samoa to do research.
I didn't really have a deep appreciation for traditional medicines. It wasn't something I was exposed to growing up. I was almost always taken to the hospital when I was sick.
When she started looking into medicinal plants, the research was more of a work obligation than a passion project.
So it wasn't very earth-shattering.
She was a skeptic, and when she left to do her master's degree, she didn't have any interest in continuing the work.
But my perspective shifted immediately after returning, and I had a son. He just suddenly wasn't breastfeeding as usual. Like, he was breastfeeding very little, so I was very, very worried. So I took him to the hospital, and after a couple of weeks, even with the medication, he wasn't doing any different. He was still not breastfeeding as usual.
It was her dad who suggested a taulasia. He'd heard good things about a woman in a nearby village who had treated this kind of thing before.
And so when I, sort of lost hope in the doctors and their medication, I finally asked my dad if he could take us to see the taulasia. I was skeptical, but I was desperate.
While Sekotilani didn't think the treatment would work, she felt she had to do something. Her son was only getting sicker.
So we saw her in the afternoon, and she told us to come back the next day because she only treats children in the early hours of the morning. So then I took my son the next day at 6 a.m. She massaged him. It was really rough, quite rough, and he was a tiny baby. Yeah, I was worried.
After the massage, known as fufu in Samoa, the healer prepared a plant juice and gave it to Sekotilani's son.
So just squeezed it in his mouth, and that was it. And in the afternoon, my son was breastfeeding like he always did before. I was very, very amazed.
That one visit was all it took. Her son was back to his normal self. This is, of course, just one success story. But as a trained scientist, Sekotilani had the ability to take a close look to figure out how it all works.
When that happened, it was immediately something that I was going to do I decided on to do for my PhD.
Sekotilani's mission differs slightly from what the team at Schross is doing. While they're trying to screen as many plants as possible, Sekotilani has narrowed her search to a handful of plants to give herself the best chance of finding a compound that hasn't been identified before.
So just focusing on, plants that are confined within our Pacific Islands region.
And she's happy to tell us what those plants are.
So there's this plant called the foimanongi. It's used in Samoa for treating ghost diseases.
Ghost disease, or maietu, traditionally describes a mental or physical illness tied to spiritual beliefs. In some cases, it can be thought of as a kind of possession.
But we look at it as, we look at the symptoms. And in Samoa, when someone has ghost disease, it's normally associated with shaking, convulsions or sudden sadness.
So, Sekotilani's theory is, in some cases, it might be epilepsy or depression that taulasia are using the foimanongi plant to treat. Adding weight to that assumption, Sekotilani was able to isolate a compound within the plant that has some interesting properties.
This compound is very similar to a compound that has been used in China for over a decade. They've used this compound for treating epilepsy in children.
While the compound is similar to something already being used in treatment, it's not identical, meaning it could be more effective or even have other uses. During her research, Sekotilani found that a lot of the plants traditional healers use do contain well-established compounds that are proven to help in certain conditions. It has given her more confidence in the work of the taulasea.
It's just seeing like the chemical compounds that I have identified and isolated from the Samoan medicinal plants that I've worked with. Most of them are known, and the biological activities of those compounds are largely in line with the Samoan traditional use.
Plant medicines have been around for generations, and they have been used to treat many illnesses successfully. But the problem with plants is similar to the promise of plants. They're full of hundreds of compounds that need to be sifted through.
So like the Fuimanongi, for instance, I collected several samples from across Samoa, and even though they are the same species, the leaf had different chemical compositions.
Each plant is in different soil, getting varying amounts of sun, rain, fertilizer, and each leaf is a different age. All of these factors can have an effect.
This kind of reminded me of why I wasn't really much of a believer in traditional medicines, because you hear stories from people like the outcomes were inconsistent. Like one day you'd go and you're cured, and then someone else comes to the same taulasea and not get the same result. And it is most likely due to the different chemical compositions of the medicine. So you have to know what you're getting in order to get the same result every time.
It's important the chemical composition of traditional medicines is known to ensure their consistent safety and efficacy. But there's much more left to be understood, like how traditional healers combine different plants and whether these concoctions can be mimicked in a lab setting. Even Sekotilani does not know which plants were combined and how they were combined before they were given to her son to help him breastfeed. She's still trying to build trusting relationships with the taulasea.
I think it's very important to have the taulaseas be part of the work because it's their knowledge and they've been doing this for years. But, the best way to finding medicinally relevant bioactive compounds is through traditional knowledge.
Building these relationships isn't a quick and easy process, especially considering that Sekotilani started out as a skeptic.
I look back to my old self and see a very naive, dismissive kind of person.
But now she wants to ensure this knowledge survives so it can continue to help people for generations to come.
Our traditional medicines actually do have value. We shouldn't really base judgment on our experiences alone because there's a lot of Samoans who have benefited from traditional medicines and I just didn't take that into account. I just figured, it never really helped me in any way, so it's a lot to reflect on.
It's clear from Sekotilani's journey there's a lot of promise in these plants. And back at Sross, we're finally able to take a look.
So we're now walking over to the Sross Medicinal Garden.
Annie Tuisunga guides us through the entrance and into the medicinal garden.
And it was mainly established so that we have varieties of medicinal plants here on Sross compound. Also in recognition of issues illustrated earlier where it's getting harder and harder to find some of the medicinal plant varieties.
The plants here were also collected from national parks and villages, but instead of being studied, these ones are being preserved. Their names and their traditional uses aren't kept secret here. There are signs beside each plant.
So we also give the common Samoan name, the common name in English, scientific name, and then also a bit of information about the ailments that they assist with. Yeah.
It's darker on the garden path, with trees and shrubs shielding us from the dull light filtering through the clouds.
This one is an example. It's a ua in Samoan. In English, it's the paper mulberry. And supposedly, it's supposed to help with stomach pain and ill-defined abdominal pains. And the parts used for making the traditional ointment is the leaves.
Before we get rained out, Annie takes us to one of her favorite trees in the garden.
In English, it's the ambarella. They're a more common occurring tree that we use on an everyday basis, whether it's to eat the fruit. But we don't really know that it has a really, really significant medicinal aspect as well. And growing up, I also didn't know that. So it's only from screening of the medicinal plants that you even discover these. So that's why I find them as my favorites, because it's trees that we've grown up with using, like eating the fruit and so forth. Yeah. At the moment, no fruiting because it's still quite young. But yeah, good for shade as well.
We step off the garden path and cut across to an information board to shelter from the rain.
Oh, yeah, it's because you have a sign here.
Annie points at the picture of a guava tree. Both its fruit and its leaves are bright green.
So guava in Samoan and English, or the Psidium guajava. And traditionally, this plant is used to treat stomach ache, diarrhea, and mouth infections.
The guava might be the best example of how scientists are honoring that knowledge while also taking it a step further.
We discovered through screening that it's also useful for early onsets of diabetes or trying to regulate your blood sugar levels.
And instead of waiting for the long process of drug development to be completed, they're making use of this medicinal plant now.
So our food science and technology team are already using guava leaves to make herbal teas. So that type of knowledge, it's really useful. And then we're also trying to make use of it through seeing what kind of functional food we can make out of it so that people can actually access it now.
A new use for an old medicinal plant, the scientific evidence to back it up. Everything listed on this information board, the plants and their many uses, is the result of hundreds of years' worth of knowledge, protected from the passage of time through the practice of traditional medicine. In a way, these researchers are just the latest contributors to an ancient custom.
That was an episode of Pacific Scientific, reported by Adele Fruin and produced by Shelby Traynor. Pacific Scientific is produced by ABC Radio National Science and ABC Radio Australia. Sound engineering was by Marcus Hobbs and Mark Chesterman. If you want to listen to more of this series, we've put some links in the episode details section at rnz.co.nz/ourchangingworld. And you can also find the link to sign up to our monthly newsletter there. If you want to get in touch, you can email us at ourchangingworld@rnz.co.nz. Tēnā koe I whakarongo mai. Thanks so much for listening. Ko Claire and Kananaho. Have a great week. Kia pai, the wiki.